Okay then, hopefully we are now live. Hello everybody and welcome to the National Space Academy Takeover. The National Space Academy are taking over the National Space Centre's social media channels all this week to host Q&A sessions with interesting people from the space sector. My name is Kieran and I'm the General Manager of the National Space Academy, and I've gone from interviewee earlier to interviewer. And right now I am joined by someone I've worked with for a long time in the space sector and a really big supporter of some of the stuff that we've done at the National Space Academy, Jeremy Curtis, who is in charge of skills and education at the UK Space Agency. So welcome, Jeremy. Hi.
Just unmute. Hello. Nice to see you, Karen.
Thanks so much for joining us. I think it's going to be really interesting to get your perspective because you have such a great oversight of the space sector generally and the different routes into the sector. You know, we're talking a lot about space careers as part of this week, but I thought it would be really good for you to start off by telling us a bit about your career and what you do now, and maybe a little bit about how you got here.
Okay. Well, my career is probably not typical of people working in the space sector, but then I expect if you talk to anybody in the space sector, they'll probably say theirs isn't typical either. So maybe I shouldn't be so worried about that. But no, I've had a very interesting career and I wouldn't have swapped it for anything. I wasn't sure at school what I wanted to study. I was very interested in biology. When I was little, I did gardening. It was really uncool, and I'm amazed how it's become cool these days. So I'm quite lucky there. And I was really interested in science and in engineering. And I think my father was a scientist who, frankly, was given a lot of engineering work to do. And it seemed a bit frustrating, his job. So I decided I'd cut to the quick and study engineering. I could have done biology, but it wasn't really easy at my school to study biology alongside physics and maths and chemistry. And for some reason or other, if you did biology, you needed to do chemistry. And if you wanted to do chemistry, you had to do physics. If you wanted to do physics, you had to do maths. At least that's how I remember it. That means nobody would ever have done biology at my school, and they did. So I must have got something muddled in my head there. I ended up doing the 3 subjects which allowed me to do engineering. And so that became the obvious thing to do at university. So I was lucky I managed to get into Cambridge and had a fantastic time. And the great thing about the course there is that it's a general engineering course. So I didn't specialise until my 3rd year in a particular area. And I did things like celestial mechanics. It was great. I found it fascinating. And that sort of brought out the mathematician in me, because a lot of designing orbits for satellites, for example, is all about maths and how you use it. So it wasn't until some years later when I was working at the Rutherford Appleton Laboratory, which builds space instruments and all sorts of other things. It's a huge centre that has lasers and computers and protons, synchrotrons, and all sorts of weird and amazing pieces of science kit. But I was working on a paper study and I found that there was some number that kept on coming up. We were trying to design a satellite that was going to test out technology, and it had to be in a particular orbit. If you imagine an orbit that's really narrow and like a very thin ellipse, you can't really see, can you? But there we are. Imagine a very elongated orbit, which goes over the poles of the Earth so that it looks down on the top of the Earth and stays there for quite a long time because it moves so slowly. And it turned out we had to put it in an orbit that was 53.4 degrees inclined to the equator. And I thought, why do I recognize that number? So eventually I went back to my university notes and discovered it was the solution to one of the more complicated problems that we've been set at university. And it was the orbit which stays stable. If you put it in any other inclination, it tends to move. So that's the best place to put it. So, you know, to me, it suddenly brought home that all this very obscure, abstract stuff that you do at school or at university is actually useful. You use it. So I used my notes all the time when I started working on space instruments. So for some years I was designing and building instruments that went into space. We were designing things that measured sea surface temperature, for example, which is really important for climate change. I was working on an instrument that looked at the chemicals in the upper atmosphere. So that's really useful for pollution and for looking at things like ozone and carbon monoxide in the upper atmosphere and so on. And then I was working on an astronomy telescope. This was going to be an infrared telescope, which was cooled down to a few degrees above absolute zero. So that was an incredible engineering challenge. And then I worked for many years on an X-ray telescope we were building with the Russians. So sometimes we were working with Europeans, sometimes with Russians, sometimes with Americans. So it's really international. And one of the things I'd always loved doing when I was at school was learning languages. So that was really useful to be able to speak to my colleagues in their language. So gradually I was working more and more with all these international groups, and finally ended up moving over to the British National Space Centre, as it was called at the time, which was a government body which oversees space. Since then, it's been replaced by the UK Space Agency, and that's where I work still. And I was asked if I would take over education and skills, so I've been working on that ever since. And the idea is to get anybody who is interested to find out more about space, because frankly, we are spending your money. I mean, as taxpayers, you're funding an awful lot of this stuff. So you need to know what we're doing. So that's part of it. But also, space is such an exciting topic. And it's a really good way of explaining a lot of different aspects of science. So it's really helpful to explain to people at school and at university why you learn some of these complicated bits of maths, why chemistry matters, how you can use biology on the Earth's surface from space so we can monitor agriculture and migration of whales or whatever it might be. And we learn an awful lot of useful things which we put into practice. But the other thing is that the space sector itself is growing really fast, and we need more people with the skills to be able to build more spacecraft and build more instruments and find out how to use them on the ground to help you and me in our daily lives and to help protect the environment and things like that. So there's a lot of different uses for it. So I spent some years working on space exploration, and that's looking mainly at humans in space. So we're looking at the places where humans might one day explore, as far as Mars perhaps. That'll take a while, but that's about as far as we think is plausible with the technologies we know about so far. So I worked on that for many years, and experiments in space. Fortunately, we now do all those things. When I was working on it, we were just doing reviews, but pretty much all of the recommendations from the reviews I ran have now been implemented. We've got an astronaut born in the UK working for the European Space Agency. We've got British scientists building instruments that get taken to the space station to do experiments. And we're landing rovers on the surface of Mars. So you've been perhaps seeing some of the exciting developments on Mars over this last week. Well, next year we're launching ExoMars, and a British-built instrument will be landing on the surface of Mars to explore it. So there's so many exciting things going on at the moment. But for me, perhaps the most exciting one, I'm just going to share my screen now, if I can remember how to do it, is what we Tim Peake's mission to the space station, which you probably know all about. This was part of what I had to do, was to try and create a big education activity around it. So you can see this picture here. These are the people who entered a competition to name Tim's mission. And we had thousands and thousands of entries. And these were the people who chose the name Principia, which in the end Tim liked best. And so we took them to the Royal Society. Principia is the name of the book that Newton wrote about many things about science and mathematics, but in particularly about gravity, because he was the one that first worked out how gravity operated. And there's the book in Tim's hand. That's the original copy at the Royal Society in London. So it was a brilliant day. And, you know, this is one of the first things we did to try and engage people in Tim's mission. But that wasn't it. We had lots of meetings with important people in government. So, you know, the fact that we've photographed ourselves outside number 10 shows how amazed we were to be working with people like this. So we were trying to plan the education and outreach activities around Tim's mission. And one of the first activities we got Tim involved in was a thing called the Great British Space Dinner. So the idea here is to get people to understand what is a good diet by looking at the diet that an astronaut has to eat. So we decided we'd get young people to design a menu for Tim to eat in space, and we needed somebody to front it. So I contacted Heston Blumenthal, and he was up for it. So we had this terrific competition. And on this particular day, Tim was testing all of the winning ideas. And then Heston's team manufacture the food, and that was a palaver, I have to say, because you've got to prove that it'll last for many years in a tin can before it can even be launched. So we learned a lot about how you get food into space, and it's not simple. But that was a terrific day. Another thing we did was even bigger than this. It was called rocket science. And the idea here was we took several kilograms of rocket seeds into space and then brought them back. So Tim had them with him in space, photographed them and sent them back down to the ground. And we got the Royal Horticultural Society to distribute them. And the launching of this was at the Chelsea Flower Show. And as you probably know, the Queen comes and visits on the first day and tends to bring her family. So in the course of about an hour, I met, I think, practically all the members of the Royal Society, of the Royal family, and had to show them around. I think Prince Philip wasn't very impressed, and I'm not even sure that Prince Charles was terribly impressed either, but the Queen was very polite.
That's amazing. I love how you're coordinated with the Queen there as well. Were you in touch
Oh, yeah.
before to match outfits?
Oh, yes, absolutely, yes. I checked and we agreed what we'd wear. It's just this suit pops up a couple more times. For some reason, this seems to be the choice of suit for a lot of these occasions. Again, this was after Tim had come back. So this is now talking about one of the other jobs I do, which is running the UK Space Conference. So it's something I've done for many years now as a sort of sideline. So in order to get all the members of the space sector together and share their best experiences and learn from each other and meet each other, frankly, we've been organising this conference now for quite a few years, and it's now got to, I think we had 2,000 people at the last one. So this is Tim on stage, meeting the public. I'm interviewing him effectively, just as Kieran is doing to me now. And Tim's answering questions that are being sent in on the computer, which is in my hand. So learning new techniques for doing all this. But you can see it's a proper conference. This was part of one of the main sessions, and we managed to do a session on education. So there's Tim again as one of my panel. So really exciting job there. I love doing it. And then one of the most surprising things of all to me was out of the blue, Queen Mary University of London said they'd like to give me an honorary doctorate. So this was for work done on the space exploration work I was talking about before, and then the space education stuff. So that was a bit weird, suddenly finding myself in these brightly coloured gowns alongside all these, well, frankly, garishly coloured academics. So that was really quite pinnacle. So that's me in a nutshell. There's lots and lots more we could say, but I don't want to go on and on until you've fallen asleep. So I'll hand back to Kieran now.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing those. Looks like some really great memories of time working on Tim Peake's, the education stuff around Tim Peake's mission. I just wanted to mention, you mentioned it was Queen Mary University of London. You also wrote a blog for them recently, is that true? That's right. Because it's LGBTQ plus History Month at the moment, February. And you wrote a blog about your experience being an out gay man working in the space sector and not feeling that it was something that you needed to shout about, but perhaps feeling that maybe I don't know, if younger people maybe didn't see that visibility in the STEM and engineering sectors, that maybe you could be a bit of that visibility. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, I've never really thought it was a big deal, at least since I came out. I mean, I was 31 before I finally faced up to it. So it did take me quite a long time to come to terms with it. So clearly I thought it was going to be a big issue. And to my amazement, nobody cared. Most people thought it was great or didn't matter at all. I've had nothing but support ever since. Everybody knows, basically, I've talked about my husband on stage in front of the whole of the space conference. So, it's just not an issue for me. I realise it is for some people though. And I thought, well, maybe I should just share my experience so people know, actually, there's not that much to worry about. I think we're incredibly lucky. We are in a very highly educated sector of people who understand that there is more to life and are not that prejudiced on the whole. It's quite a dynamic, varied, diverse sector. We can always improve. I mean, we still need to have more women. So if you're a woman and listening, we need you. Come and join us. So frankly, I think getting the gender balance right is a bigger problem for us. But we're doing all the time, and the opportunities for everybody are absolutely terrific.
Yeah, well, I just think that's really interesting, and people can check out that blog for Queen Mary University London. You can find that probably from, if you look back on things that Jeremy has shared on, maybe on Twitter and things like that.
Yeah, it's on Twitter, yeah. Or the UK Space Agency is tweeted.
Oh yes, yeah, UK Space Agency would have shared it. So just on the UK Space Agency, you mentioned that it had a different name before, and when people think about space agencies, they think of NASA as the first one that comes up. ESA recently advertising for their new astronaut intake. So what's the UK Space Agency like compared to those agencies, and what does it do for the UK? It's government funded, isn't it? So as you
Indeed,
mentioned.
yes. We're actually a part of central government, slightly hands-off, or sort of arm's length, I think is the word that people often use. We report into the business department, and our minister is the science minister. So she's basically in charge of us. So there are political decisions that are made above us, and then we are the ones that are responsible for carrying out pretty much everything to do with space that concerns the government. So, for example, Kieran, you've just mentioned the European Space Agency. That consists of, I think it's 22 different countries who are partners of it, and we are the British partner of it. So all the money that goes to ESA, the European Space Agency, from the UK goes through us, and that's about, I think it's 300 million pounds a year. So it's a sizable amount of money. Probably 2/3 of all of the money that we spend goes to ESA. Of course, we get the benefit back. So I mentioned ExoMars, for example, that's a European Space Agency mission. I talked about my work on the Infrared Space Observatory. That was a European Space Agency mission. We're talking about Tim Peake. He's an ESA astronaut. So we do an awful lot with ESA. But of course, we also work directly with people like NASA and with the Japanese Space Agency, JAXA, and with lots of other agencies around the world. So we work directly with them. We also work directly with the United Nations and with EUMETSAT, which is the European equivalent for meteorological satellites. So your weather forecasts depend on the satellites they operate. So we're responsible for all those. But if you wanted to build a satellite or launch it from the UK, you'd need to be allowed to do it. And guess who gives you the license? You'd have to come to us for that. But the main part of what we do is trying to encourage business to be more successful and to support scientists with their science research by providing them with the instruments in space that they need to gather the data they need about whether it's stars or whether it be the surface of the Earth or our atmosphere or the sun.
Okay, great. I just want to mention whilst we are live, we have got the live chat open on YouTube. If you do want to ask any questions, you can put questions in there. I've got some questions. I've been asking my own questions. I've got to not get carried away and just ask my own questions. I've got some questions from students here that were asked in advance. And a lot of them talk about what kind of opportunities there are in the space sector, and what kind of opportunities are there in the space sector now, and what kind of opportunities do you think there will be in the future? So Barney, one of our students, has asked, what will the career opportunities be like in the space sector in the future? So if you can project yourself, talk about now and project yourself forward a little bit into the future, Jeremy.
Okay, well, there's an awful lot happening. It's moving so fast, so it's going to be quite difficult to get this one right. But the immediate things that are happening are, let's talk about Mars, for example. So part of what NASA's Perseverance rover is trying to do is to take samples, which is going to leave on the surface. And then when ExoMars comes, it's going to gather up some of those samples and put them in a place where they can be loaded onto a spacecraft to bring back to Earth. So in due course, those samples will arrive back on Earth. Well, who's going to be analysing those? It's going to be people who are probably in school now, not people who are near the end of their career. So think about it, it might be you, or maybe in due course, when we actually get to the point of launching people to Mars, we're going to need people who are prepared to have a go at that. So frankly, that sounds scary, but by the time we get to that point, we'll have managed to work out all the technology that's needed and overcome all the problems. So in terms of science, there'll be things like that, but we still don't understand how the universe works. So there's a lot of fundamental physics to be done. And what is the most important thing probably for all of us at the moment on Earth? It's our environment, climate change. We've got to sort it out. And of the, I forget how many parameters there are that the UN has set out that we need to monitor, But most of those parameters, things like the temperature of the atmosphere and the sea level and wind strength and all this sort of thing, of those, most of them can only be measured from space. So we need people who understand how to do this, to build instruments, to build spacecraft, to operate them, to handle the data. I mean, handling data, there's so much data coming back. So that's computing, basically. So if you're good at computing, we'll give you a job in space, probably. And then there's interpreting the data when it comes back. So we need numerate geographers. We need people who understand about how the atmosphere works and understand how the instruments work that collected the data they need to use so that they can put the two together and understand it all. So that's a lot of sort of theoretical stuff, but then there's practical things as well. How do you use your mobile phone? Well, it uses all sorts of signals coming from space, and we need people who've got the nous to understand how to apply those things for problems for us on the ground, whether it be helping your elderly relatives to not get lost, or it might be tracking cargo as it travels around the world. It might be putting timestamps on financial transactions. If you need to get money out of a cash point, it needs a timestamp and it gets it from a satellite. If we switch the satellites off, you wouldn't be able to get money out of a cash point any longer. There are so many of these things, and there are more and more ideas coming up. So the future, I think, will be very much people with bright ideas about new activities, new things that you can do, using signals from space, using data from space, and combining it with other things to create new products and new services that will either help people or will help the environment or will help us understand science better. And of course, we'll be launching things. So we actually need rocket scientists. I mean, it sounds like a cliche. I've spent all my life telling people, no, I'm not a rocket scientist. We don't launch rockets from the UK. And suddenly here we are about to launch them. We think next year there'll be rockets being launched. So we need people who understand all that sort of thing too. It's a huge range of different jobs. I've only touched on the surface, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear about that variety. And just a little plug, tomorrow morning our talk at 11, we have someone from a company called Skyrora who are working on UK launch joining us. And then on Friday morning, we'll be hearing from someone who's involved with Spaceport Cornwall, another UK launch site. So Skyrora working up in Scotland, I think. And then, so we've got the two ends of the country that will be involved. It's incredibly exciting.
It is really exciting, yeah.
So when faced with that range of jobs in the sector, what would your advice be to a young person who's just starting to think about what do they want to do, to work out what they want to do, and especially if they've got an interest in space?
Well, what I would say is that you must make sure that you do the thing that you're most interested in. I would take no time at all thinking about which are the best paid jobs, because if you're really interested in something, then you'll be good at it. And if you're really good at it, then you'll rise to the top of whatever it might be. Whereas if you try and do the thing that everyone else tells you is the thing you should be doing, then maybe you won't be so interested and you won't do so well and you won't get to the top. And even though in theory it might be better paid, if you're not one of the better ones at it, then you won't do as well and you certainly won't have as much fun. And think about it, if you're going to have a career of 40, 50 years now probably, then you really want to do something that you really enjoy doing. And there are so many different things in the space sector. I mean, I started out designing proton synchrotron. I mean, frankly, the number of times I went to a party and people said, what do you do? And I told them, and their faces fell. And then I moved over to space and found that people said, what do you do? And as soon as I said the word space, their eyes lit up and they wanted to know all about it. And I have to say, that's one of the things that really makes a difference, even if it hadn't been interesting, which it is. So I've met the most exciting people around the world, done amazing things just because I've been working in this sector. So I would say space is an opportunity to do a lot of different things. If your thing is biology, do biology. If you want to be a medic, then you can be a medic. If you want to fly jet aircraft, then fly jet aircraft. But with all of those things, you could still come and work in the space sector. But the most obvious ones are to do engineering and computing. We will always need people who are engineers. I'm a mechanical engineer by training. I could have been an electrical engineer or any one of many other sorts and still have worked in the space sector. We use nearly all the different sorts of engineering there are. So choose the one that you're most interested in and we will find you a job, I'm sure.
That's fantastic advice. I think it's so tough for young people because you're asked to make choices when you're choosing which, certainly in England, choosing GCSEs and A levels, and at an age where you're still working out what you enjoy, and you feel you can sometimes feel a lot of pressure from different people, can't you, about what you should do. So I think that's amazing advice. So it sounds like in your career that you followed what you enjoyed about engineering, and maybe, I'm guessing, problem solving was something that was interesting to you. So when you were offered the chance to take up the role at UK Space Agency on education and skills, what was it that made you think, oh, I'm going to follow that interest now, perhaps stepping away from your engineering background?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I'm not sure I know the answer, to be quite honest. I remember quite early on in my career, my big boss was supposed to be talking to some students from school and suddenly found he had a meeting. So he said, Jeremy, could you do this for me? And I thought, you're joking. I have no idea what to talk about. And he said, it's all right. It's all prepared. Here's my slides. Just use those. Here's the, what I say. And so I used his script effectively, and it was really, really good. The kids loved it. And I thought, well, actually, you know what? I can do this. And I found that the more often I did it, the more I enjoyed it. And so that was part of it. I suppose, I joined an amateur drama group because I love theatre. And it's a bit like theatre in a way, having an audience and a topic to talk about that you understand. And once you realise you're only talking about the things that you know about, the thing that I hated at schools when they'd say, we need to give you need to give a talk over the next 2 minutes on this topic, and there was something I know nothing about. That was terrifying, and it still would be terrifying even now. But when I'm asked to talk about the things I do know about, it's really fun, and having questions from people makes you realise they're interested too. But the other thing is that I think for me, education is one of the most important things. If you look at nearly all the problems in the world, the solution to nearly all of them is education. And coming back to climate change, I'm afraid we have left the world in a mess for the next generation. The only hope to sort it out is to understand what's going on and find solutions, solving problems. That's science, it's engineering. If we don't do that, we will not have a planet to live on. So for me, that alone is justification for why education is so important. And then the other thing, I suppose, is that you look at the number of people who just do not understand the point of science. They don't understand how it works. And you see so much misinformation going around on social media and so on. And again, the only solution to it is to understand the scientific process, to question your sources, to question what people say. I mentioned the Royal Society at the beginning. Its motto is take nobody's word for it. And I think that's a motto we could all use. Take nobody's word for it, always question everything. And until you're satisfied, don't necessarily believe what you're told. And if somebody says, well, I was told this by somebody or other on social media, well, that feels like you perhaps should go and do your own search and some homework and find out the real science behind it. Climate change is happening, we have to sort it, and education is the way to do it.
And I take your point completely, that education is the way that we end up with the bright sparks of the future to solve these challenges. I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question, even though we're very close to the end. So we've had a question in the comments about what advice would you give to an adult thinking of leaving their current job or career to apply for a career in the space sector? And I might roll it in with where should people look for the basics of information about careers in the space sector?
Great question. Yes, the answer is there's lots of opportunities. We're looking at this right now because there's quite a lot of sectors that are struggling, frankly, because of various economic crises that we're going through. So this is a good time to look at it. So definitely do that. We're looking for people with several years skills, and particularly in short supply in the space sector, people who know about project management and leadership and all sorts of things, entrepreneurship and so on. Where to look for information, we do have a little bit of a pointer on the UK Space Agency's website. We've got a page that's to do with education. If you look on it, you'll find it at the top right, with links to all sorts of things. I think the Space Academy You've also got links to various information about getting careers in space. And if you're looking for jobs in space, then there is a website called, I think it's spacecareers.uk.
Yes, spacecareers.uk.
I've got it right, thank goodness for that. I was in the wrong order, so be careful. But if you don't find it easily, then do a Google search. So there's lots of information out there, but start with those, and you can't go too far wrong.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us, Jeremy. And you can follow UK Space Agency on Twitter and other social media. And you can see more of these Q&As all week here on the National Space Centre's YouTube channel. And you can get in touch with the National Space Academy on Twitter at UK Space Academy. Or you can check out our website where there is a contact form if you have more questions. Send us your space careers questions and we may be able to put them to our other guests later in the week. Thank you so much for those of you who put questions in. I'm sorry we couldn't answer them all. And thank you, Jeremy, for being here today and for stepping in and for all the work that you do in around education and skills. We'll hopefully get a chance to involve you in another Academy event soon.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah. Just ended the stream.